Today we're going to be taking a look at 7 current NBA players whose talents have vanished. Now whether this is because of the Monstars and a Space Jam 2 remake, I don't know. But what I do know is these players aren't half as good as they once were, and there's no clear explanation why. So let's take a look. Dwight Howard was drafted straight out of high school with the #1 pick in the 2004 NBA draft by the Orlando Magic, with what turned out to be a smart choice because Howard started all 82 games and averaged 12 points and 10 rebounds, becoming the youngest to ever average a double-double. The Magic won just 20 games the year before and lost Tracy McGrady. Dwight Howard now set the Orlando Magic on fire, and his stats increased every year. He brought them to the 2009 NBA Finals with a historic season, averaging 20 points, 13 rebounds, and 3 blocks per game on 61% shooting. They'd lose that year to Kobe Bryant and the Lakers, but it didn't stop his stats from getting better because 2 years later, in the peak of his career, he'd averaged 23 points, 14 rebounds, and 2 blocks per game. Downhill turns started when he decided to leave the team that drafted him and join Kobe Bryant and the Lakers. He still averaged impressive numbers, 17 points and 12 rebounds. But what was a very popular story at the time took place, which saw Dwight Howard leaving LA because he couldn't cooperate with Kobe. He'd average 14 points and 11 rebounds in Houston for the next 2 years. And for the 2016 and 17 season, he joined his hometown team, the Atlanta Hawks. And although he would shoot 63%, he would only average 13 points, 12 rebounds, and 1 block. It doesn't make sense how a 31-year-old player in his prime can go from the 2011 season with 23 points, 14 rebounds, and 2 blocks to 13 points, 12 rebounds, and 1 block, and not be too noticed on his team or throughout the league. He said it's because of his back surgery he had, but many others like Shaq and Charles Barkley say that he has no passion and determination. He was the NBA Defensive Player of the Year for 3 consecutive years, an 8-time NBA All-Star, a 5-time member of the All-NBA First Team, a 5-time rebounding leader of the NBA, and a 2-time leader in blocks. But all of these awards and achievements take a dead stop at 2014. Next is Lance Stephenson. Stephenson was drafted by the Indiana Pacers. In his rookie season, he only played 12 games and averaged 3 points per game. The season after, he improved to 43 games played, but only had 2.5 points per game. The next season, he played 78 games and got up to 8.8 points per game. In his 4th year in the NBA is when he really broke out. He had what was at that time a great stat, a league-high 5 triple-doubles. Thanks, Westbrook. Lance had 14 points per game that season, along with 7 rebounds and 4 assists. Many were outraged that he didn't make the All-Star team that year. Lance and Paul George, along with someone soon to be mentioned, led the Pacers to the #1 seed in the Eastern Conference. They'd face the Miami Heat, where Lance would use his mind games and trash-talking, famously blowing in LeBron's ear to try to edge an advantage, which didn't work. The Pacers offered him a 5-year, $44 million contract to return, but he got cocky and thought he was worth more. He turned it down and took a 3-year, $27 million contract from the Charlotte Hornets, where he would average 8 points, 4 rebounds, and 3 assists per game. He's been on 6 different teams since Indiana, and averaged as low as 4 points per game one season with the Clippers. Now he's returned to the Indiana Pacers, but seems to still have left his game behind because he cannot get back to that 2013 level. He was traded 3 times in the 2016 and 17 season and only played in 18 games, averaging 6 points per game. The third player we have is Roy Hibbert. The highlight of Roy Hibbert's career was battling the Miami Heat and LeBron James in the playoffs with the hopes of making it to the NBA Finals. In the 2011 and 12 season, Hibbert would make the All-Star team, averaging 12 points, 7 rebounds, and 2 blocks per game on 50% shooting. He battled the Miami Heat in the second round that year, causing many problems for them as an elite rim protector. They'd lose in 6 games, and the next year he'd have very similar stats, but wouldn't make the All-Star team. For the 2013 and 14 season, he'd once again make the All-Star team, averaging 12 points, 8 rebounds, and 2.6 blocks per game on 45% shooting. The Pacers, along with the previously mentioned Lance Stephenson, would meet the Heat once again in the Eastern Conference Finals this time. He'd once again play a huge role as a 7-2 shot blocker, but they would once again lose in 6 games. He'd average stats close to these for the next 2 seasons with the Pacers, but never the same. He'd move on to 3 different teams between when he left in 2015 and 2017. His averages since he's left are 5 points, 1 block, and 5 rebounds per game on 54% shooting. He's never been the same since leaving the team he was drafted by. I think we're starting to learn to not leave a team after you peak early on. Now for one of the more obvious selections, Derrick Rose. Derrick Rose started his career by leading the University of Memphis to a 32-0 start, which would land them the #1 seed in the country. He would lead the Memphis Tigers to the NCAA Finals before they'd lose to the Kansas Jayhawks. He'd average 14.9 points per game, 4 rebounds, and 4 assists for his freshman year. He'd declare for the 2008 NBA Draft, where he'd be the #1 overall pick. For his rookie season, he'd average 16, almost 17 points per game, 4 rebounds, and 6 assists. He'd get greatly better the next 2 seasons, before being named the NBA MVP in the 2010 and 11 season for averaging 25 points per game, almost 8 assists, and 4 rebounds. He'd have an amazing season, and the next season he would lead his team to the #1 seed in the playoffs before suffering a career-changing injury, and another, and another, and another. He wouldn't play the next season, and only 10 games in the 2013 and 14 season. He'd average only 17 points, 4 assists, and 3 rebounds per game in his next season back in 2014 and 15. After being traded to the Knicks for the 2016 and 17 season, he'd average 18 points per game with them. His stats were still good, but it was the manner in which they were scored. Rose was basically not heard from in his returning seasons. The only reason you'd hear from him were because of more injuries. His talents could no longer bring his team wins. He went from an MVP of the league to just another above-average point guard from a few serious injuries. And now for a couple players you may not have expected. First, TIAGO Splitter. TIAGO Splitter came into the NBA after playing in Brazil and Spain for 10 years. He joined the San Antonio Spurs with a slow start of 4 points per game in his first season. He began making a difference for the team in 2011 and 12, by now averaging 9 points and 6 rebounds. They'd make it deep in the playoffs that year before losing to the Thunder. In 2012 and 13, he'd increase his averages to 10 points and 6 rebounds as the starter for the Spurs, before they'd lose to the Miami Heat in the finals. The next season, he'd average 8 points and 6 rebounds as a starter and helped the Spurs defeat the Heat to win an NBA championship. He'd play consistently for the Spurs for the next 2 seasons before being traded to the Hawks. He was never an outstanding player, but after being a starter for a championship team, he was not heard from on the Hawks, averaging only 5 points per game, before getting injured and being traded once again to where all players go to die, the 76ers. He'd get injured again the next season and only play 5 games, averaging 4 points and 1 rebound per game. He went from an NBA champion to not being heard from in years. This is strange because he should still be in his prime at only 32 years old. For the next player you might not have expected, SERGE IBAKA. SERGE IBAKA has put in a lot of work throughout his NBA career. In his first 2 seasons, he was just another player, but in his 3rd year in the NBA, the 2011 and 12 season, he averaged 9 points per game, 7 rebounds, and an astounding 3.7 blocks per game, setting him in as a certified shot blocker. This would especially come in hand when the Oklahoma City Thunder made it to the finals against the Miami Heat the next year. That season, he had now averaged 13 points, 7 rebounds, and 3 blocks per game. He had also started taking more threes. His rim protecting ability played a huge part in the series, but the Heat would still come out victorious. Over the next 4 seasons, his game would change and he would morph from a strong rim protector to a stretch power forward. This was thought of as a bad move by veterans such as Charles Barkley and Shaq. Since 2013, IBAKA's field goal percentage went from 57% to 48% in 2017. His three-point percentage has gone up from 35% to 39%, which is a good shooting number from a power forward. Also, he's averaged about 1 less rebound and 1 more point per game from 2013 to 2017. His game has definitely changed, and it shows. His overall talent as a player hasn't vanished, but he has developed. The talent that has vanished, though, is his shot blocking ability. He went from 3.7 blocks per game in 2012 to only 1.4 blocks in 2017. This is a huge turn and a big downside to the potential that he was showing early on. And now finally, Jeff Green. Jeff Green doesn't have many highlights yet in his career, but he has had some impressive play. He was drafted by the Seattle Supersonics, where he averaged 10 points and 4 rebounds in his rookie season. The next season with the newly named Oklahoma City Thunder, he'd step it up to 16 points and 4 rebounds per game. He'd keep up the same play after he was traded to the Boston Celtics 2 years later in the 2010 and 11 season as a part of a deal for Ray Allen. His highest scoring average was 17 points and 4 rebounds in the 2013 and 14 season. His play would slowly decline from there as he would get traded to Memphis the next year. He'd play 2.5 seasons for them, averaging about 11 points per game. Memphis would trade him to the LA Clippers for a year, where he'd average 10 points and 3 rebounds in 27 games. The next year, in the 2016 and 17 season, he'd sign with the Orlando Magic, where he'd average only 9 points and 3 rebounds per game. Jeff Green is a good example of how bad it can be for a player to move from team to team. His talents have slowly vanished. He went from averaging 16 points and 6 rebounds to only 9 points and 3 rebounds. It seems whenever he stays with one team, he's slowly progressive, and when he moves, he's brought right back down. As he just signs with the Cleveland Cavaliers on a 1-year deal, the signs aren't looking good for him. Hopefully he can find himself a permanent team. Thanks for watching this video. Like and subscribe if you like it and you'd like to see more, and comment what you thought of these 7 players.